In this tutorial, I wanted to cover screen fading, specifically building a screen fade solution within the universal render pipeline in Unity. I will show you the backbones in this video with some nifty tricks on how to make it more usable in your games, with the example of teleporting the player between some rooms. I will then follow up this video with a part 2 detailing how to tie this into the timeline system in Unity, so make sure to look out for that when it drops. Now, if you have ever been in the situation where you wanted to transition between scenes or teleport a player, then you've probably come across the need for some sort of screen fading. But before I go into the method I have running in some of my titles, I wanted to address another method that is very popular in many tutorials. And I call this the obscurer method. Here you obscure the player's vision by placing some geometry in front of the camera. This geometry might be a quad, or a plane, or an all-encompassing sphere with inverted normals, like you see here. To me, this feels a little hacky, and in some circumstances may lead to unwanted effects. So let's look at those. The first one of these unwanted effects might be other post-processing effects, still playing in the player's vision, even with the obscurer showing. Another is you could suffer light bleeding if you're using planes. And lastly, and this is in XR especially, you can get other problems like players' hands when they're brought too close to the face, ruining the illusion by clipping through the obscurer. Now these can all be handled, for instance, by doing things like turning off the post-processing at exactly the right moment, or turning off potential clipping geometry. But as I've stated, it all feels a little hacky, and it would be terribly annoying to set that sort of thing up. So with all that out of the way, let's dive into the screen fade method that does not suffer from these problems and isn't hacky. As I stated, I'll be looking at doing this with the universal render pipeline and the renderer feature setup method. But it should be noted that screen fading with a similar sort of method is also possible for those of you that are using the standard renderer in Unity. Now, while looking at creating a renderer feature that would give me a good quality screen fade, I came across a video by VR with Andrew titled Building a URP Screen Fader for Unity XR. I'm going to leave a link in the description for where to find it so you can check it out after watching this video. Now that video gave me a foundation into filling out my own solution and saved me some time building it out from scratch. The shader and the first few classes are basically identical to his. Where it differs is when we get into the actual screen fade class. So to not steal his thunder, I will run through the classes that are similar in a quick fashion, so you will still get the gist of them as we move towards a real-world implementation in our game. So let's start by looking at the scene for our tutorial that we're going to use. And what I've done is I've downloaded the ArchVizPRO Interior Volume 3 from the Asset Store, and I will leave a link to that in the description should you want to come and grab it. It's a fantastic looking scene, especially if you're going to do some sort of viewing or real estate application, or you want to have your character in a really fancy environment to start off with. So this is a really nice setup for that. So as I say, links in the description. Now, what I've done is I've actually created a teleporter script, and we're going to be adapting that, so I'll show you that in a moment. And what it does is it takes us from one location, i.e. here in the living room, through to the kitchen. And I've set up some canvases to basically enable us to press to trigger that action. So if I press play, I'm in the living room to start off with. And as I mouse over, we get the prompt to take us through to the kitchen, and I can press on that and bang, we're in the kitchen. And that's a really harsh, I'm in one place and I'm in the next place like straight away. And if I press escape, I go back. So I can jump back and forth between the kitchen and the living room. But as you can see, this is really sharp. I'm here and I'm in the next place straight away. If I was in virtual reality, that would feel incredibly jerky, but even in just normal games, it's just not right. I want to fade out and then fade in. I want to have some sort of transition between one location and another. Now, if you were switching between scenes and you wanted to load in another scene, obviously you could fade out to black, and then you could do your loading in and then fade back in when you get that new scene come up. And here we're going to fade out, we're going to do the teleport, and then we're going to fade back in. So that's our actual tutorial set up, but let's start looking at how the screen fader breaks apart. Now, the first thing I want to point out is where the forward renderer is, the one that we're going to actually be changing. And you can find it if you've set up using the 3D URP template, you can actually find it under settings, forward renderer. Now, if you haven't done that and you haven't actually set up URP yet, there's a load of tutorials in Unity, and I'll link them in the description on how to set that up. And then you'll find the forward renderer that you're interested in. And here you'll see our renderer features section. And this is where we're going to add our settings for our screen fade. And that comes from our scripts. So I've got the free script here. If I load up fade settings in our Visual Studio, we can see that this is a serializable class that basically adds all the bits that we want to turn on, turn off, change settings to enable the screen fade to work the way we want it to work. We'll pass it a material, and this will be a material that from a shader that I'll show you in a moment. And we tell it whether this particular setting is turned on, whether it's turned on, and the render pass event as to whether it's after or before the rendering post-processing. Now we default this to after because we basically want to have a screen fade after we've done everything else. Otherwise you'll have bits turning up on top of your screen fade, which won't look good. Now the next thing to look at is the pass. Now the screen fade pass or scriptable render pass will basically take those settings and then execute that. And we can see the execute function here. And again, this is all detailed quite heavily in the other guy's tutorial that I'll link to, so I don't want to take his thunder away. I'll just quickly pop through these. You've got your command buffer pool, which will give you a command. We want to grab the renders, and this is very similar to if you've ever done graphic split stuff, the on render image in a script on your camera, and we get render targets for that, so render textures, and we're taking the source and we're sending to the destination. So that's very similar to that graphic split that you've probably seen before. And here you can see we actually have the command blit that performs this. And then we have release that basically clears everything up afterwards. Now the next thing to look at is screen fade feature. Screen fade feature takes that pass, takes the settings, it performs the create, and it adds a render pass. And this is something that actually, this is the renderer feature that we actually set in our forward renderer that I just showed you. Now, the only other thing to look at is the shader. And the shader is pretty simple. The only thing we're really interested in here ourselves is the properties that we expose. And in this case, we're going to expose the color because we might want to fade to a different color, not just black. We might want to fade to white, or maybe we're getting loads of damage and we just died, so we fade to red. And we want to actually do the fade, so we expose an alpha to that. Now, this is an incredibly simple shader. And the reason for that is we don't want to overcomplicate this. It's literally just an image that's getting pasted right across our screen to give us what sort of alpha we're at in our screen fade. And we're not going to put any complexity into that because we just don't need it. We want it to be nice and cheap, nice and optimized. So that's what the shader looks like. So now let's put that together. If I come back into Unity, then in my content folder under materials, I actually have my shader that I just showed you called screen fade. What I could do is I can right click and I can press create a material, which is a super quick way of basically creating a material from a particular shader you have in interest. So you don't actually have to come into shader, do a drop down, find the one you want. You can literally create straight off the bat. Now our material, alpha 0, fade color, we're going to fade black. So we're just going to set that to black. And that's all we need to do in that part. Now let's look at our actual renderer. So in the forward renderer, we want to add a render feature. And once you press this, you'll see screen fade feature actually comes up because it's been registered in Unity from the scripts that we've already just shown you, and it's ready to go. So we press screen fade feature. It's a terrible name, so we'll give it a better name and we'll just call it screen fade feature. Profile tag, we're happy with screen fade. This render pass event that we're interested in, we're going to leave that to after, and we're going to select a material, and from the materials, we're just going to find our screen fade. There it is, screen fade. Job done. That is our renderer feature set up. Now we're going to create the class that enables us to use this on our camera. Okay, so let's pop back to our scripts and our screen fade folder, and we're going to create a new C# script, and we're going to call this one screen fade, and we'll open that up in Visual Studio. And here it is. It's a mono behavior and it's called screen fade. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set what the function will be called that we actually call to do the fading. And we're just going to use public void fade, and we're going to say whether we're going to fade or not. So ball fade. Now we'll want to store that because we're going to do all of our operation, our actual fading, in our update loop. So let's store that. I'm going to expose it because I probably want to use this in editors and things like that and know if we've done it. So we're going to have this as is faded in. And we're just going to get, and we're going to private set that one, and we're going to start with that as false because we don't want to start faded in. And here we're going to say is faded in. Oh, that should have been faded. Let me just change that. Faded, faded, and then set that to fade. There we go. Okay, so that will be our entry. And now we actually want to perform the fade itself. Now we're going to be fading the alpha in our material. So we want to get our material and we want to get the parameter that we're going to set for that particular shader. So we'll put in material and we're going to do mFade material. No. Now, the way we get our material is we're actually going to pull that from the screen fade feature that we just set up. So we'll add in a field, serialized field and tooltip, and we're going to put this is the screen fade feature and screen fade feature. And there we go. Screen fade feature. Okay, so we're going to set that in our inspector. Now let's pull in our material from that. And what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate the material, set up, and then our settings and our material. There we go. So we're instantiating a new version of that material from what we set up in our screen fade feature. So now we want to set the screen fade feature settings. We want to set the runtime material that we're using there to this instantiated version of our material because we're going to be changing this material in this script and we want that screen fade to actually get that material that we're using and the changes we're making to it. So screen fade feature, settings, runtime material, and we'll make that equal our material we just created. Cool. Now, once we've done that, we're going to want to make the changes in update. We're going to want to fade it in and fade it out. And we're going to do this with a timer. So we'll set up a timer as I have done in lots of my other scripts. And we're just going to use a nullable float for this. And we're going to set that to null. So we know whether we're actually running or not. And in our fade, we're going to set this to 0 to say, yes, start going. Because in here, we're going to do our timer. Does it have a value? Is our timer running? Yes, it does. Great. Well, let's add some time to that because we're going to be doing a lerp and we're going to be checking this time. So we'll add the delta time to the timer. And we're going to want to know how long we're going to be doing our fade. You know, how long is it going to be? Is it going to be half a second, or whatever? So we'll add in a field up here. Duration of fade. And this will be a float and duration. And we'll set that to a second. There we go. Okay, so now we've got this. We're going to want to basically perform our lerp. So if is faded in. So if we're fading in, we'll get our value, and that's going to be a lerped value between 0, because we're fading in, so we're fading from nothing, to 1. And this is going to be what we set in our alpha. Now, because it's a lerp, it's time-based, and that wouldn't give us the right answer. That would just give us what the delta time addition has been. We want to actually work out what that is against the duration of the time. And that will actually give us a 0 to 1 between 0 and our duration that we're interested in. Now we're going to actually set the alpha in our material. Now, you could actually put in the name here as a string, but who wants to do that? That's just a horrible way of doing it. And Unity gives us a really nice feature to basically get the property ID, the int. So we're passing in an int, and it's doing a very simple check instead of a stupid string check. So let's grab, and I like to put my constants right at the top, our alpha parameter. So shader alpha parameter. And we'll take shader, property to ID. And here, if you remember from the shader, this was actually called, if I spell it correctly, that would help. There we go. That is actually called alpha. So there we go. And we'll use that shader property here, alpha parameter, and we're going to set that to value. Great stuff. However, what happens if we're going the other way around? What happens if we're fading from black? Well, we're going to do the opposite. So instead of doing that, we're actually going to go from 1 to 0. And that's it. Nice and simple. And we're going to fade from that alpha like that. Now, the only thing left to do is we don't want to keep the timer going after we've passed the duration, because we will have faded out, and that makes no sense. So we'll go, is the timer value over the duration we're interested in? And if it is, well, that's great. Timer can equal null. There we go. So that is all we need to do to get our fade running. So if we save this and we come back into Unity, we'll go to our camera, and underneath our camera, if I shrink that, let's add in screen fade here, the class we just made. Now, we're going to want to test this, and obviously nothing's going to happen straight off the bat because we've got nothing calling this. And what I like to do is I like to create editor scripts to enable me to test things without having to run through like game manager loops or timeline or anything to get to the point that I want to test my fader. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a quick editor, custom editor, that's going to be linked to this screen fade. So if I go to my editor folder, I'll create a C# script, and we're going to call this screen fade editor. Now, if I open this up in Visual Studio, here we go. Oh, reload. Now, this actually derives from the editor, which is from the editor library, and it's going to be a custom editor, type of screen fade. There we go. So it's going to know what we are. We don't need any of this. This is all model behavior stuff. We're actually going to override the onSpector GUI. Now, we're only going to use this editor when the application is running. So application is playing. Because I'm nice and neat, I like to leave a little gap after my exposed variables before I start adding in buttons. So I'm going to put a little space there. And then we're going to put in our button, and this is going to say fade. Now we want to actually get our screen fader, and we want to put it into the mode that we're interested in. So screen fade equals, and this is from the target. So screen fade target, handy little way of getting the item we're interested in, and screen fade dot fade. There we go. Nice and neat. And here we're going to go true, or we're going to go false. But what we can do is, because we've exposed our is faded in, we can actually just do the negative of that. So we're just going to do the opposite to what it is faded. So we only need one button. So if we jump back into Unity, got our inspector set up. Let's go to our camera. Now we'll need to set our screen fade feature, and we can just press there and select it. We don't actually have to go and find it in the project menu, but you'll find it underneath. If you're in settings, you'll find it under the forward renderer here if you want it. But okay, let's dive in and press play. As it starts up, our inspector will come on board. Because we're playing, we get the fade option. Now we press fade and out we go. And we press fade and now we come back in. Nice, simple fade and quite clean. There we go. So the next thing I want to do is I actually want to add that to my teleport script. So let's have a look at the teleport script. If we come into here, this is teleporter. It's very, very simple. This isn't what I use in my proper games. This is just for the actual tutorial itself. I take the operating camera that I'm interested in. I take the starting destination, so where I want the camera to start in the world. I have a current location for where it's set to. I have the update that does our back to the previous destination. That actually takes off a stack. So every time we set a new destination, we add it to the stack. Well, we add the previous destination to the stack. Therefore, we can actually go backwards. In the start, we have our starting destination. And this is the main GUMP, the main functionality of it. We have return to previous destination, which just takes our current destination, sets our current location to the top of our stack, and then performs the teleport to that. If we're going to the destination selected, and this is what gets called from the button from our canvas, we check that we've actually got that the current location isn't the destination because we don't want to teleport to the same location because that would just be odd. We then, if there is a current location, and there should be, we push that current location onto the previous destination. And the reason it should be is because we start with a destination that we're going to go to. And then we actually perform our teleport. And here is where our teleport is. And this functionality is where we're going to actually set up our fade. But how do we do that? So when we actually teleport from one location to the other, when we move from this living room into the kitchen, we're going to fade to black, then we're going to perform our teleport, and then we're going to fade back away from black. But how do we know that we faded to and we faded from? Because they're timed. How do we know that's changed? Well, we could set a timer on the teleporter to say, okay, this time's passed, now perform the teleport. But then if I change the duration around on my screen fader, I have to remember to change that. So the best thing to do is just give a callback from the screen fade script going, yeah, we've faded, it's ready to go. So in our screen fade, what we'll do is we'll add into here a callback. So we can just put it up top here if we want. Public action, which we get from our system library. And we want to say whether we faded or not. And we're going to be calling this finished fading. There we go. Nice and simple. So finished fading. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually perform it here because this is where we know the duration has finished. Invoke. And then we're going to basically use is faded in. Nice and simple. Now, let's do the teleporting bit. What we'll do here is we'll grab a screen fader that we've set up. Oh. So. Screen fade. Screen fade equals not. With the screen fade we're interested in. Now, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we teleport when we screen faded. So we'll say mScreenFade dot finished fading on screen fade finished fading. That's what we'll call it when we actually perform. So we'll take this down here because we're interested in it down here. And this will tell us the value of if we're faded in or if we're faded out, etc. Now, what we want to do is we don't want to perform the teleport here. We actually want to perform it when we know our fade is finished. And we also want to know that it's true that we've actually performed our fade, because if we perform it every time when we faded in and we faded out, so when we faded back from black, we'll do a set position to a destination again, which again doesn't make sense. Now, as you can see, we need to store our destination that we're going to. So let's put a transform up here and we'll call this destination. Set that to null. And we'll say m destination equals destination. And then we'll set our destination here. Now we want to actually perform the screen fade. So screen fade dot fade true. And we also want to make sure that we have a destination in mind. And after we've moved, we want to clear that destination. Now, why is that? Well, let's say we're using the screen fader for something else. Let's say we're performing some sort of, oh, we've just been hit by a zombie or something and we've screen faded partially to red or something like that. Well, once we faded out or faded in from that moment, this will get called. And if this destination wasn't checked, then what would happen is it would send us to that destination. And as you perform more things, you might want to put more checks in here, but this should be enough because as soon as we've performed our fade out, we clear our destination, which means this can't be true. Great stuff. Now what will happen at the moment is this will fade to black, but it won't fade back. And that's what we want to do here. So mScreenFade.fade, false. Excellent. Let's jump back into Unity. So here we are. We press play. And we'll get an error because we haven't actually set the teleporter. So in the camera, in this teleporter script, we haven't set the camera to there yet for the screen fade. So we just have to set that. That will clear that up. Now let's press play and it should work this time. There we go. And we pick our kitchen, we fade out, we fade in. Nice and clean. And if I press escape to go back, we fade out, we fade in. Let's do it again. Nice and pretty. Okay, now let's start adding some polish to this. We've already got our fading, but you'll notice when we press play at the moment, as soon as it starts up, we're immediately in the scene. There's no fade to the scene itself. And if we're coming in from the title screen or we're coming in from another scene, etc., we're going to want to have an option to fade in when we've started. So what we can do is we can actually add that to our fader. So if we jump back into our screen fade script and we do a little bit of cleanup because I don't like the publics up there, I'll put them down here. And what we'll do is we'll add a field in here with a tooltip of start faded in. And that'll be a flag. Start faded in equals, because it's already false at the moment, we'll keep that as false, but we're going to change that momentarily to true. And when we start faded in, is faded in equals true. And we're going to want to just grab setting this materials alpha, and we're going to set that to true. And that's it. Now, the reason I started that at false is because that's what the action is at the moment. That's what I had it set up as. So now, once I go back into the camera, all I need to do is press that, tick that box. And now if I press play, we start faded in and we don't go anywhere. But why is that? Well, it's because we haven't got anything to fade us out. We're starting immediately in black. That's what our start faded in actually means. So what we can do is we can do multiple things here. We could set that into our screen fade script to have it fade in once we've actually started, or more prominently, we can wait for something else to tell us to fade in because we know everything's loaded, we know everything's happening, we can start faded in. And what I do is I usually put this on a timeline script, or I put this on a game flow manager script that I have running around. Now at the moment, I'm kind of using my teleporter as my game flow script, so we're just going to add it there. But bear in mind, I don't usually put this in here. I will add this into a game flow script. So right here, we've got mScreen fade. All we're going to do is just do fade false, which will just fade us from black. So if I come back into our world, press play, now we should fade in. There we go, we faded in. Now you'll notice something when we did that. It basically started partway through. And also, as another prompt, when we jump from one location to another, even though we've got the fade, we're still not in black for any particular amount of time. Now, when you're using virtual reality or anything like that, and you teleport from one location to another, in this case rooms, you'll actually want to pause in the black before you come back. That makes it less jarring. And that might be for a split second if you're doing quick teleports around the place. But you still want to be in that black, because at the moment, as soon as we faded to black, we're fading from black. We're not at that pure black at any particular point. So let's put a delay into our screen fader. So if we come back in, we'll go to screen fade. We'll put in a new timer, and we'll call this delay timer. Oh, and again, because it's timer, it's going to be a nullable float. And it's a very, very simple addition here. If delay timer dot has value, else. We'll do the other timer. And this delay timer will literally just be cut down using the delta time. And once it reaches below 0, we'll set it to null, and it will jump out of this and start this next timer. Now we want to set this obviously, and we'll do that in our fade option. So we'll come in here, we'll make a nullable delay, we'll set it to null. Therefore, any scripts that are currently using this fade won't be affected. Oh, and then we'll say if delay has a value, then delay timer equals that delay's value. There we go. Now, if we're in our teleporter at the start, we'll do 1 there, and we'll do 1 second here. Now, I'll point out that because this is in a start method, other start methods could be happening after this, which could lead to delays. So as I say, I usually have this in a game flow, which looks at if everything's ready, and then starts this. But for now, we're going to stick it in the teleporter. And then this fade back is from the teleport itself, the action of teleporting. So we'll get that nice delay there. So let's jump back into our scene. And we press play. And what we should notice is we're in the black, and we fade from black. And then when we go to the kitchen, we fade to black, we're in black, and then we go out of black. So it's a nice, clear point of transition. And again, depending on the speed of your game, depending on the action that you're playing, you might want to actually make that quicker. So it jumps to black and then comes out, and the duration of the fade itself is a lot less. But that's up to you, and you should work basically on your action of your game and the speed that things are happening. Now, one of the last things I wanted to actually look at within this script and this process was the color. Now, at the moment, we're fading to black and we're fading back from black, and that's set in our material. Now, in our worlds that we create in virtual reality, or in this world, we might not want to go to black. This is a very light scene. Going from black to white to black might be quite jarring. Maybe we want to go to a lesser gray or something like that. Or if we've hit, we might want to go to red or any sort of color. So let's expose out the color and let's make some changes. So in our screen fade script, what we want to do here is we actually want to look at what color we're going to start with. So we'll add a field, and we'll put into this color to fade to. And here we're at a color, and we're going to set this as fade color. Nice and simple. And because we're already starting at black, we'll have our default value at black. Now, we'll need to expose the parameter of the color in the shader for us to set it. And we're going to do a similar thing to what we did above here. We're going to create, this is going to be an int, shader, color, parameter, and that shader, property to ID, and that is actually set to, and you would have noticed that from the beginning of the video, fade color, capital F. There we go. So now we're going to want to start with our color that we've optioned. So in our awake, we'll take our fade material and we'll set the color parameter, and we'll set that to the fade color. So now we'll jump back into Unity and we should see it all exposed. Here we are. And we can change that to a reddish color. We press play. And now we start as red and we move out, go to the kitchen, go to red and move back. Obviously red's a terrible color for this, but it proves the point. What I would actually have is I'd have a lighter gray for this scene because it's nice and light and I don't want to hurt people's eyes when they jump from one to the other. So we come from gray into here and then we move and we come back out. So that now gives us that extra level of polish of being able to select the color that we're interested in. But in some circumstances, we might want to override that color. We might want to say, okay, we want to fade in this particular instance to a different color because it's a different sort of teleport or something like that. Maybe we're going into a very dark room, or maybe we're doing a nighttime building. And in that case, we want to fade a color that's black instead of this lighter white. So now we're going to say if this color value we just set here, so if color has value, then we'll do exactly what we did above, dot set color with that color parameter to this color value. And that's it. That's how we set our color when we're doing our fade. So what we could do here is on our teleport, we could actually set our fade to green. So we could actually come into here and say, okay, we don't care about the delay in this circumstance, but we want to set our color to blue. Let's pick blue because it's the first one that came up. So save the screen fade, come back. There we go, press play. Start off as gray, we come in, we do our jump, we're going to blue, and we're coming out from blue. So that was how we set the color and override it. So the last override we want to do in here, where we're setting this color, etc., is duration, because we might want to randomize up the duration that we're using, or set the duration when we're actually teleporting to a very quick amount. And this could be because we want to fade in nice and slowly, and as speed or action starts happening, we want to change that to a much quicker duration. Now here we're going to need to do an override because we don't want to change the actual duration that's defaulted. We want to put in an overridden duration, because maybe you want to use that main duration for something else later on. Maybe you want to have it overridden for just the actual teleport functionality itself, but keep that standard duration for coming into the scene and out of the scene. So let's put in overridden duration into here, and we'll set that overridden duration to null, because we want to set that as a flag. We want to say whether we're actually overriding it or not. Now we come back down into our functionality here, and we'll put overridden duration equals duration. And now we want to actually change the duration that we're using here, because at the moment we've got this M duration. but we want to see if we've got in an over-in duration. So float duration equals m over in duration. So if this has value, then let's use it. Over in duration dot value. Otherwise, we'll stick with the duration that we've defaulted everywhere else. And now we just change this out. And that's all we needed for overriding the duration. So in our teleport, we could actually say, okay, we don't want to delay when we go up, but we're going to want to make this super quick for going out to the actual null for color. And we're going to make it super quick for going to the black when we're teleporting. So now if we come back into Unity, we press play. We use the standard duration for coming into the scene, nice and slow. But when we go into the kitchen, boom, we go to gray almost immediately because we're using 0.1 of a second, and then we come out of there. And obviously that would be super jarring. That's just to show how that actually works. So we'll take that out for now. Now, one thing I usually do in the scripts in the editor is prove how this actually works. And we can do that by just doing an instant fade. Because again, we don't want to have to get to points where we can test these things. We just want to test these straight off the bat. So in here, we could copy this. Just set this to null. And now we set this to 0f for an instant fade. Now if I press play, I have an extra bit of editor script that I don't have to worry about going and finding that point that it fades instantly. I could just press fade instantly to test it. And that is how you override the duration. Well, that's it for the first part of this tutorial. In part 2, I plan on showing you how to tie this feature into the timeline by creating a custom track. So if you're not already subscribed and are interested in that, make sure to press the subscribe button and the notification button so you'll see when that drops. And if you like this video, then consider hitting the like button. And as always, thanks for watching.